Welcome into episode 107 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm Augustrometer.
Newegg gets egg on its face. California considers laws for Internet of Things, and using your phone calls to protect your iPhone. A slew of security stuff on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. Every week, we could make all three stories about data breaches, and boy oh boy would that be dull. Still, hitting them occasionally is not a bad idea, partly because you may be a victim and not even know it, plus it gives us a chance to revisit some best practices. The Verge says hardware retailer Newegg suffered a month-long data breach that exposed users' credit card information to the same hackers who targeted British Airways and Ticketmaster UK earlier this year. The exact scope of the attack is still unknown, as the company just discovered the breach this week and began taking action. Newegg sees about 50 million monthly visitors and has a business valued at $2.65 billion. Threat management firm RiskIQ, which uncovered the breach alongside cybersecurity firm Velexity, says we can assume this attack claimed a massive number of victims, although the numbers are still being investigated. How did this happen? Well, the piece says hackers injected 15 lines of code in Newegg's payments webpage that's accessible through mobile and desktop, and it stayed on the page from August 14th through September 18th. The script, placed on the final checkout page, would skim credit card info. Credit card data was then sent to a server of a similar domain and an HTTPS certificate that was actually controlled by the hackers. So help me out here. I know I just said how this happened was they inserted 15 lines of code, but I'm not a coder and I'm certainly not a hacker, but even if I was a coder, how do I go from knowing 15 lines to inject to actually being able to inject it in a theoretically protected site?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what's going on here without more details, but one way they could potentially do this is if they had a way of inserting a record into the database that was then redisplayed on that page. And then that record, they could literally put some JavaScript in there, and those 15 lines of JavaScript would then populate that page and would run when that page loaded. So that's one potential way. Other potential ways, they might have access to the server itself. They might be able to intercept web page loads between the server and the end user. There's different ways to do it. I suspect it's probably closer to the first method, but again, without more details, I'm not quite sure exactly what they did.
Okay, I guess so. I'm asking you, so you're a developer, you've developed everything from relatively small apps to relatively large deployments. If you're writing a site, or if you're the guy who's managing a site, is it just that you've got so many different people who might be accessing stuff? I guess what I'm wondering is, you, Augustrometer, are the guy who's doing this thing. How does somebody else that you don't even know who they are, and it turns out they're a ne'er-do-well? Is it just that this deployment is so big that somebody might be able to sneak in? How does that part happen?
Well, it's just, basically tinkering around with various sites until you find one where you can do this. That's what these guys do, is they look for vulnerabilities. I don't think they were necessarily targeting Newegg because, it's Newegg. I think they were targeting Newegg because it's a whole lot of people use that site. So they tried their hardest to find a doorway in order to capture data and send it back to their own servers.
And we know they aren't just targeting Newegg because there are other sites that they have targeted.
Exactly.
What's weird to me is we actually kind of know who these people are, theoretically. Not who these people are, but who these people are. Threat management firm RiskIQ says MageCart is the name of the crew behind the Newegg, British Airways, and Ticketmaster UK attacks. MageCart tends to ignore company databases or servers and instead targets customers' personal data by injecting scripts on payment platforms. A few questions around that. First of all, what are the best next steps for people who did use Newegg between the middle of August and the middle of September?
I think the first thing you need to do, I mean, the article says it very clearly. They were targeting credit card data. So the first thing you need to do is change your credit card. Whatever credit card you use to buy something from Newegg, change that card number. Because they're going to use that to, do a lot of nefarious things. I mean, you likely that credit card data has already been sold on the black market to somebody else for $1 a card number. And then they are the ones that actually do the nefarious things with it. But that's the first thing that I would do. Changing your password is always a good idea in a case like this, but your credit card data is what they were after, and that's what I would change.
See, I want to go, we'll get to the password thing in a second because, we'll get to the password thing in a second. It was it The Verge that I said this was, or Engadget? I can't remember off the top of my head.
The Verge, I think.
Okay, The Verge. Yeah, The Verge said, keep an eye on your records. Watch out for suspicious activity. Your personal opinion is, if you bought something on Newegg between the 14th of August and the 18th of September, don't even wait to see if something weird happens. Just go ahead and change it.
Yeah, without going into too much detail, my bank it's a very large bank. It's a very national bank. And because of their exposure in terms of just their size, for example, when Target was breached, a few years ago, just about any time a company is exposed, a lot of customers are affected that use the same bank that I do, and they'll just shut my card down and send me a new one. And so I'll be sitting there buying a coffee at Starbucks, and my card will fail for no reason whatsoever other than some idiot, attacked Newegg. And my card somehow got swept up in it. So for me, I'd rather be ahead of it and know that my card is going to be canceled rather than be somewhere and be completely embarrassed because somebody's looking at you when you buy a $3 coffee for them to say, pay your bill, dude.
I want to hit you up for clarification on one other part of the story because you jumped ahead to the password thing, but I wanted to, get through the credit card part first. I also want to get clarification. I don't know if this is from you or from The Verge or from MageCart or from who, but the piece says MageCart tends to ignore company databases or servers, which makes one think that passwords weren't compromised. Though Newegg actually sent out an email to customers, and they say that they're uncertain exactly what information was accessed or acquired, and they're not sure how customers might be impacted. I was saying a minute ago, you said a minute ago, change your password. You're talking about your Newegg password.
Correct.
Okay. And if you're using the same password for anything else, first of all, shame on you. And second, change all those passwords as well. And please don't change them all to the same thing because I don't want to have to say shame on you again. Checklist number 8, by the way, if you're wondering about password stuff, we did that way back. I guess that would be like the second week. Or second month, that we did, that we started doing the checklist. Passwords, do's and don'ts. It covers things like password no-nos, that would be the what not to do part, creating strong and secure passwords, getting to know password manager apps, and finally, what to do when your password has been compromised. So if you're a Newegg person, yes, we don't know for certain that your password was compromised, but, assume that it might have been. And the first step, like August said, change your Newegg password. One last thing to do is watch your email. The Verge says Newegg sent out emails to customers who made purchases during the 1-month time period earlier this week. It plans to post an FAQ on its site by Friday. Newegg says it will send an email with a link to that FAQ. I would imagine, though, that there will be people who will say, Newegg sending out emails? I wonder if I could make a Newegg email. Watch out for scams at this point because...
Absolutely.
Yeah, because what Newegg is going to do is they're going to send you something that says, hey, here's where to go for more information. What Newegg is not going to do is send you something that says, click here to update your account. And so, if you get one of those, now it's kind of funny because they're doing what they can to make sure that people know that they might be vulnerable, which in some ways... That just opens up a new vector for vulnerability, it seems.
Yeah, it's insidious.
Everybody talks about the Internet of Things, August. Everybody talks about the Internet of Things, but California may actually be doing something about it.
Thank goodness.
Oh, I know. Isn't it about time somebody... Oh, California to the rescue. Engadget says the Golden State is ready to put into law rules meant to protect connected devices against hackers. According to the report, the state Senate has sent Governor Jerry Brown draft legislation that could beef up security across the vast ocean of smart gadgets. If a device requires you to sign in, manufacturers will either have to use unique pre-programmed passwords or make you change the credentials the first time you use it. Companies will also have to equip the device with a reasonable security feature or features that are appropriate to the nature and function of the device. Now, there is a decent distance between here and there. First, there's no guarantee that Governor Brown will actually sign the law. And second, if he does, it won't go into effect until the start of 2020. Now, to me, this sounds good, though the piece has critics arguing that the wording is vague and doesn't go far enough in ensuring manufacturers don't include unsecured features. For its part, Engadget argues that fuzzy wording in the draft language may actually be positive, as technology companies and hackers typically move faster than lawmakers can legislate, so more concrete security measures that the bill could have laid out may soon seem antiquated anyway. One more bit of good news, assuming any of this is good news. As big as California is, it is far from the only market for Internet of Things things. Engadget points out that it's possible that should the law come into effect, manufacturers will adopt the same security measures for their products in other states that they will in California. A number of draft bills related to connected device security are languishing in Congress committee purgatory, so the California law could prompt movement on legislation at the federal level as well. Now, I can hear both sides of these arguments. On the fuzzy language, it's often said, the perfect is the enemy of the good. If we wait to hammer out legislation that accounts for every eventuality, first of all, it might end up being too restrictive, and second, it might be outdated before the ink on the governor's signature is actually dry. Conversely, vague ideals and assurances might lead to device makers doing as little as possible, while at the same time giving consumers a false sense of security. I'm curious, you hear this story, you hear about the proposed legislation, because nothing is final at this point. What are your thoughts?
I like vague, believe it or not. In my dealings with HIPAA, which helps protect patient data at your doctor, your hospital, or whatever, when I first started dealing with HIPAA, it was maddening because the rules and the laws are so vague. Essentially, they don't tell you what to do. They just tell you what the penalty is if you don't do them. And I just found that so frustrating. But then I started to realize that, it made you work harder to make sure that you didn't hit those penalties. So things tended to be more tight than probably anyone could have imagined just because, a goal wasn't, a bar wasn't set for you to meet. And so you kind of set your own bar and you try to jump over it. And I like that idea. I like the idea that these companies will sit there and try harder to make sure their devices are more secure.
How many smart devices do you own?
Not that many, honestly. I wish I owned more.
Do you really, though? Because 9 out of 10, it seems, are just waiting to steal your stuff or sign you up to some bot army or something like that.
Sure, but I'm a gadget guy, and I can always turn off the internet. That's fine. Mostly I just go for the Apple gear because it works, and beyond that, I don't have anything really that I would consider a smart device. I mean, I've got some Philips stuff that works with HomeKit, but I don't know that you would call that smart devices.
What about your TV? Do you mind if I ask?
I do have a smart TV, but I don't use any of the features on it. I use the Apple TV.
Yeah. It seems like, though, you can almost not buy a TV that's not a smart TV at this point.
Right.
And it's not, you might actually be able to find TVs that are not smart TVs. I would be a little bit surprised. But the other thing is the smart TVs are just so cheap because, I mean, a part of that may have to do with the fact that, you know, they're thinking, okay, well, we'll knock off a little bit here, but we'll make some of it back in services or things like that.
Or transmitting your data to a central server to collect it, you know?
Little things, you mean?
Yeah, just, you know.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say I don't think about the things that I have that are actually smart devices. I mean, I've got an Xbox One, which I assume is a smart device. Of course, it's talking to Microsoft, but then it's also talking to whatever other apps I have going through that.
Sure.
And I don't know that Microsoft is necessarily as careful as Apple, but we talked a couple of weeks ago about how Apple isn't necessarily as careful as Apple when it comes to what information is being taken through, you know, various applications and such.
Sure.
I have a smart TV. Everything else, I think, is Apple stuff. So I feel good about that, except for the things I'm actually using for entertainment. And, you know, and mostly I am Apple TV as well, which is crazy. I've got a smart TV, an Xbox, and an Apple TV. That's we might need to have a meeting when I'm done. If you don't want to wait for the governor of California to do his thing or for the year 2020 to be smart about smart things, there is another checklist that would be great for you to check out. Checklist number 42 covered Internet of Things, new devices, new concerns. That included a definition of what the Internet of Things is, which we sort of skipped over. But if you don't know, episode 42 of the checklist. Also, security and the Internet of Things, problems and pitfalls. And finally, being smart with smart devices. In a moment, something new Apple is doing to protect its users, but first, a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. People used to think that Macs were immune to malware. While that's never been true, it's less true today than it's ever been before. More and more people are using Macs, doing more shopping, creating more content, storing more info, giving more bad guys more reasons to try to hack in. The number of malicious files from Macs has increased exponentially over the last decade. Staying ahead of the bad guys is important, and MacScan 3 can help. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Give worry the boot with MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Would you trust Apple with your phone calls and emails? If your answer is no, but you have an iPhone, you may want to reconsider your answer since you do trust Apple with your phone calls and emails. So maybe a better way to ask the question would be, do you trust Apple to do something with your phone calls and emails, aside from route them properly to you? From an article on VentureBeat, Apple's promise of transparency regarding user data means that any new privacy policy update might reveal that it's doing something new and weird with your data. Alongside this week's release of iOS 12, tvOS 12, and watchOS 5, Apple quietly updated some of its iTunes Store terms and privacy disclosures, including one standout provision. It's now using an abstracted summary of your phone calls or emails as an anti-fraud measure. In the iTunes Store and privacy windows of iOS and tvOS devices, Apple says to help identify and prevent fraud, information about how you use your device, including the approximate number of phone calls or emails you send and receive, will be used to compute a device trust score when you attempt a purchase. The submissions are designed so Apple cannot learn the real values on your device. The scores are stored for a fixed time on our servers. Now, the weirdest part of that to me is that people still make phone calls, apparently, but that's not the part that struck VentureBeat as strange. That site says this provision is unusual for a few reasons, including that Apple TVs don't make phone calls or send emails. As such, it's unclear how Apple computes the device trust score for iTunes purchases made through Apple TVs, but there's other potential information about how you use your device that could be scraped and abstracted. It is equally unclear, says VentureBeat, how recording and tracking the number of phone calls or emails traversing a user's iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch would better enable Apple to verify a device's identity than just checking its unique device identifier, though I will say that one doesn't strike me as so strange. I can't remember when, but I know we did a story on the checklist in the past few months that had sites deciding whether you were who you seemed to be based on how you move the mouse or cursor on your computer. So if you're suddenly making many, many, many more phone calls, or any phone calls maybe that's not you. Or, maybe it's enough to start a light blinking at iTunes security. I don't know, did that... To this point in the story, sir, how does all this sound to you?
I think it sounds clever and responsible. If you take on face value what Apple says when they say, we're not transmitting any of your data, we're just transmitting a score. Mm-hmm. If you can take that on face value, and I know that's a big ask because these days you can't really trust anybody. Though you can trust some people more than others, I don't think you can ever really trust anybody. But if you take that on face value, what they're doing, I think, is clever and responsible, because none of that information is going back to the servers other than sort of an aggregated score. And as VentureBeat points out, sure, you could use the UDID, but at some point, then you've got the UDID and you're tallying phone calls on Apple servers, which is exactly what they don't want to do, is to keep track of your information on their servers. What they're trying to do here is to come up with a score based on what's going on your phone. And so that they can determine if there's anything, hinky, going on when the numbers go wonky.
In addition to the UDID comment, VentureBeat points out that every one of these devices has both hard-coded serial numbers and advertising identifiers, while iPhones and cellular iPads also have SIM cards with other device-specific codes. But if you can add one more check, this one in the form of behavior changes, I don't see why you wouldn't. Maybe the most amazing thing in this story, Apple has responded to it, which, somebody at VentureBeat knows somebody. They called and said an Apple spokesperson reached out to confirm that the device trust score is indeed new in iOS 12, and clarified that it was designed to detect fraud in iTunes purchases, as well as to reduce false positives in fraud detection. It apparently gives Apple a better likelihood of accurately determining whether content is being bought by the actual named purchaser. Reiterating its commitment to user privacy, Apple says that the only data it receives is the numeric score, which is computed on device using the company's standard privacy abstracting techniques and retained only for a limited period without any way to work backward from the score to user behavior. No calls, emails, or other abstractions of that data are shared with Apple. It's still unclear how the trust score works with Apple TV, which has neither emails nor phone calls, but presumably uses similar metrics stored on that device. It's so funny. You say the whole thing about assuming that you can trust anyone, and can you really trust anyone? The one thing that I would say is this is everything that Apple has built its reputation with consumers on. There are two things. There are, we're not going to sell your data, and as you said earlier, it just works. And even if it doesn't completely just work, when it finally does work, it works so well you forget about the problem that you had initially. 9 times out of 10, it seems. What's funny to me is, this almost feels like, it almost felt like when VentureBeat was starting this, they were like, okay, this is a very strange thing and everybody needs to know about it. It feels to me like this is the kind of thing that because Apple has said in the beginning, hey, by the way, we're doing this thing, it's going to look weird, but it's really fine, and here's all the stuff we're doing. Had they not done that, and a month later somebody finds something where your iPhone is sending some random score to Apple, that's like a month and a half of bad press, as opposed to, like one day of somebody going, oh, this is weird, but Apple says it's fine, so I guess it is.
Yeah, it's like going on a date with somebody and telling them up front about, one of your biggest problems instead of letting them find out on date 3. Which would you rather? And I think this is Apple kind of getting out in front of it and being totally transparent, which you have to respect that. Again, whether or not you can trust what they're saying is a different story, but you at least have to respect the fact that they're going, hey, this is what we're doing, and we just wanted to let you know.
I had been thinking that we should run a win a date with Augustrometer contest, but after that comment, I'm not sure. And with that, another list is checked. But remember, there is plenty more to explore. Old episodes upcoming. The site to start for all of it is securemac.com/checklist. You'll find notes there for today's show and every show we've done before, and you can listen to them there as well, including checklist number 8, password do's and don'ts, and checklist number 42, the one about Internet of Things. Those shows and so many more, all in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.